Okay, so I think today is Tesvav or Tezainel. Tezain? It's Yud Zainel? Oh, today's Yud Zainel. And Baruch Hashem, we're back in the Beis Medrash, and we're learning Sai in the Beis Medrash and Sai out of the Beis Medrash. Okay, I feel like being Pesach al Shnei Seifim. I'm in the Beis Medrash and I'm out of the Beis Medrash. Zok Teile Gebor. Omar. I shouldn't close me. Okay. Okay. Can everybody hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, so he's not hearing through it. Sam, should we just adjust that mic? Do you not hear me? Okay, so I'll bring this closer then. Can you hear me now? Okay, so it's better. Amar Rav Yehuda, Mishmei, Rav Shmuel bar Shivas. Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav Shmuel bar Shivas, Mishmei the Rav, in the name of Rav. My Rovin, you're allowed to make an Erev, bepapuin, uvechalagloigos, uvegudgonios. You're allowed to make with these three things. 2 out of 3, the archbishop knows what they are. The third one, the archbishop doesn't know what they are. So let's just see how he teaches them. He teaches papuin as papuin, she doesn't know what they are. Purslane are chalagloigos, and gudgonios are coriander. I Googled them, and they all look like green leafy vegetables. So it would be difficult for me to, even if Google used the same picture, I wouldn't have known the difference. But they were all green leafy vegetables. So the halacha is you're allowed to use these things for the erev. Avaloi b'chazes, you're not allowed to use chazes, which is something called green wheat. I think it's like it grows near green eggs. Ahem. Veloi b'chafnios, and not with kafnios. Kafnios are figs that are of poor quality. So let's just see if Rashi comments on these items, and Rashi just explains what they are. Okay, I believe that they're spices, but they could be used as oichel sometimes. So for an Erev, you need something that you're going to eat, and those things are acceptable. But chazes is not acceptable, kafnis is not acceptable, because I guess they're not considered things that people would eat. Freite Gemara over gudgonios, with gudgonios, mima arvin, and gudgonios I think was coriander. Again, it's some type of green leafy vegetable. Votanya gudgonios merubei bonim yachelu, chashuche bonim lo yachelu. Gudgonios are like menthol cigarettes. They reduce your sperm count. And because of that, unless you have a lot of children, if you are Yerushalmi, gesundheit. That's why Yerushalmi smoke menthol cigarettes. But if you're not a Yerushalmi, you shouldn't be eating it because it causes a reduction in children. So it's not a good thing. It's not a good food. So if it's not a good food, how could it be used for an Erev? Vim hukshu l'zera, if it was left to be hard because you weren't going to eat the leaves, but you're going to use it for the seed that you were going to get from it, then it's very bad for you. And then af merubei bonim lo yechelu. So if this is not a good quality food, if it's a food that even involves some danger, how could you use it for an Erev? Zokt Gemara, Tergema Ashali Hukshul Zera. What type of this vegetable are we talking about? If it wasn't hardened to use for its seed, rather you want to use its leafy vegetable. You want to use the leaf. And we're also only referring to people that have a lot of children who won't be badly hurt by eating this vegetable. Even someone who needs children and doesn't want to hurt his chances, even he can use this for an Erev. He wouldn't eat it. So Gemara, like we said in the Mishnah, the chazulam rubei bonim. Even though he himself might not eat it, but there are people who would be happy to eat it. Milat nan, didn't we learn in our very own Mishnah? My rovin lenazar biyayin. A nazar surely cannot drink wine. Yet a nazar is allowed to use wine to make his Erev with. Why? Because he can serve it to somebody else. Well, Yisrael b'truma, and a Yisrael could make an Erev with truma. Again, a Yisrael can't eat truma. Alba, you see from here. Listen, I know a lot of people that have much more hana from food by serving it to yener than they have by eating it themselves. So that's also good to make an erev with. Hachanami, so too when we're talking about this good goniyos, afal gav lechazalahai, chazalahai. Viboy and if you want to say another pshat, ki ka'amar Rav, when did Rav say that you're allowed to use good goniyos for an erev? It's not the standard good goniyos, which in fact are not good for you, but it's referring to behind the cookie madoi. These the good goniyos that grow in India, and those don't cause any damage. So that takes care of the first of the first item in the list that we chose to analyze, which were good goniyos. Now the Gemara wants to focus on the second thing that Rav spoke about. He said, "Avaloy bechazos." You're not allowed to use this green wheat type of thing.
Modai is, by the way, Modai is Media. That's it's not India. India is Hodu.
Oh, it's Hoidu. So where? Oh, so Modai is where?
It's Parasu Modai. It's right near. It's
So it's in the Persian area.
Yeah.
Okay, it's from Modai.
Just for the record.
There, I think they also have too many children. So what does it say by Chazos? By Chazos, Rashi says, "Shachas shel tfua." It's the straw of tfua. Kishu york when it's green. The gozes in noichel noisai. The people cut it and people leave it. Yet, nevertheless, Rav said you're not allowed to use it for your erev. Which are hops, which I think is like the grainish thing that you make beer out of. The chazos and this type of green straw, my Rovin ben, you could use them for an erev, unlike what Rav said. Actually, this is Rav itself. I'm a reader of Rav, so it's a steer minei of Rav. Rav said you can't use kashrus, and now he says you could. And umavarchan alein boy priyadama, and you make a bracha boy priyadama on them. So like kasha, it's not fair why in one place Rav said you could use these for an erev, and why in another place Rav said you could not use it for an erev. Hamakamed also Rav lebavel, halabasar also Rav lebavel. Rav never heard of such a thing that people eat chazos, but when he came to Bavel, he sees that people eat chazos. So he said, "Oh, I didn't realize it's something that people eat. Oy bazoi, that's called something that's normal to eat, and therefore you can use it for an erev." Frag the Gemara, just because they use it in a bubble, if everybody in the world, if nobody uses it, and one population center such as Bavel use it, so that makes it that it's considered normal. Will Bavel have a ruba de alma? Is Bavel roiv the world? Is Bavel so prominent that since something is done in Bavel, that makes it normal? Latanya, hapol the bean basar and the barley, vatilson. What is tilson? Let's see what the article title. I'm sorry, a fenugreek. Okay, I looked them all up. No, I looked them all up on Google, and they're all green leafy vegetables. I couldn't tell the difference. There's only one item here, like the pull, that's not a green leafy vegetable. Oh, people use that? Oh, that's okay. Fatilson. V'shazarin liyerik. If you planted it because you wanted to use its leaf as a vegetable, then botla daitai etel kolodom. Your das is bottle. Your das is bottle, meaning it doesn't matter what you did. we look at the use of this plant, how everybody else uses it. Lefichach, therefore, zaron chayiv. If you planted them, then you're chayiv and meiser. I'm sorry, zaron. Its seed, no matter why you planted it, its seed is chayiv and meiser. The yarkon and its vegetables, its leaves, putter. So you see, we don't care what your das is if you're a miyut. It all is totally in what the rabbim does. And the rabbim uses it for zera, not for yerk. So too, how could you say that Rav adjusted his position on what the status of chazos is because of the people in Bavel? They don't dictate to the world the use of chazos. And you should say there as well, batla daitai. Now, what's the question of chayiv and what? When you're talking about for what purpose you planted this tilson, did you want it for the leaves? Did you want it for the seed? So what it would be chayiv? Zokrash, it's chayiv and meiser. You'd be chayiv to separate meiser from it. It's also relevant. A zera, if you planted something for the zera, it goes busser when it takes root, and we know that for a yerek, the year of meiser goes busser when it's actually cut, when it's harvested. So it's also very relevant if we're considering it a zera or if we're considering it a yerek, because we know that the first 2 years of the Shemitah cycle, you take Meiser Rishon and Meiser Ani, and the third year of the Shemitah cycle, you take Meiser Rishon and Meiser Sheni. So in order to know which Meiser to take, you need to know what year to attribute this crop to. So if it's a Yerek, you would say what year it is based on when it was cut. But if it was a Zera, you would say what year it was based on when it was planted and took root. So it makes a big nafkamina to the Chiv Meiser as well as to which year you attribute it to. But I'll call upon them, you see from this price that you say Batal Daitai. Just because one community, just because in Bovel they did something one way, that's not a reason to change halacha. So it's Tzurk, Shver, and Rav. In one place, Rav said Chazis can be used for an Erev, and in another place he says it can't be. Shachalayim v'agargir shezorin liyerk. Shachalayim, I think, is cress. And Gagir, the name of a Gagir is. Let's see what he says over here. He says no, it's garden rocket, it's cress and garden rocket. Again, they both look like green vegetables. If the reason why you planted them was for their leafy vegetable, Misashin Yerk. Vizera. You take Meiser both of the Yerk and of the Zera. Zarin Lazera, you planted for Zera, also Misashin Zera V'Yerk. You also take off no matter what. So I guess they're both considered part of its plant. But I'll call upon them. You have a kash on Rav by Chazis. In one place, Rav said it could be used for an Erev, and in one place he said you can't. So to Makika Amar Rav, where did Rav say that you can use it for an Erev? It's bidagnunaisa. What's dagnunaisa? Rashi says it's bechazis shegadol begina. That's something that doesn't grow commercially. It grows in your garden. The chula almi ochlalu. That everybody uses as food. So therefore, it's not a steer in Rav. The Rav that says that kashos are not, you cannot make an Erev with them. Those are referring to the commercially available. But the ones that grow nagina, those you could use for an Erev, and those you make a bar priyadam on, and that's what Rav was referring to when he said that. Zok Gemara, lemay chasi. You're saying they can be used. What are they used for? Can you please give me a recipe where I can possibly use this dagnunaisa? In the good old days, if they didn't have pepper to season their barbecue with, they would grind up this dagnunaisa, and they dipped their roasted meat into it. So I guess it acted as an artificial. It was the aspartame of peppers. Those people who were on a diet and couldn't eat too many peppers, they had to use the aspartame. They had to use the imitation pepper, which is called dagnunaisa. Zokta Hela Gemara Vayter. Rab Zera, he had a cholish megrise when he was exhausted from learning and he just couldn't focus anymore, and he needed a break. Have a ozil v'Yosef a pischa Rav Yehuda bar Ami. He would go sit by the door of Rav Yehuda bar Ami, who was probably saying shir there. And there are people in and out. There's like probably a bismedrash. And Amari said, "Ki nafki va'ayli rabbanon," as the rabbanon, the Talmidei Chachamim, are coming in and out of this bismedrash. Eikum mikamayu. I'm too exhausted to learn, but I can still get up and sit down again. I can still do squats. He would love it. Thomas would love this. If you're not learning, go do squats, right? I remember when I was in Camp Kotayr, we would be the football field was part of the campus, and Rabbi Gifter Zatzal used to walk around the campus from time to time. So once we were in the middle of a football game, and Rabbi Gifter walks through the path to go from the Besmedrish to the dormitory where he lived. So the game stopped because no one's going to throw a football around and might hit Rabbi Gifter. So everything stops. So he stops and he looks around with a very puzzled look on his face. And he says, "Oder Spiel, oder Lernen. Stamma rumstehen, das ist bittel Teire." So Rabbi Gifter? I don't remember.
I remember Zera got shechted in Rabbi's house by Purim.
That's right.
Zera means small.
That would have been a good time for him to get up and go.
That's why he didn't go to Rabbi's house when he needed a break.
Especially when he was exhausted and he couldn't defend himself. But he thought, "Ekem mikamayu," that would be a good time for me to stand up in front of the Talmidei Chacham. It says, "If they say a token, v'adarta pnei zaken, v'akabel b'hu agra," and I will be able to get schar for it. So interesting enough, it doesn't say in Pirkei Avos, "Al tiyu kavodim hamishamshim es a rav al manas lekabel pras." Elo tav mishamshim es a rav al manas shaloi lekabel pras. Right. So the Mefarshim say that the schar that one gets for standing up in front of Talmidei Chachamim is Yireh Shamayim. That's the schar you get. So such a schar, Yireh Shamayim, that you're allowed to be mishamish as a rav al manas lekabel, that type of pras. And interesting to note, the Mishnah is a very difficult Mishnah to understand because it says al ti mishamshin es a rav al manas lekabel pras. Elo mishamish rav shalom manas lekabel pras. That's not the exact nusach of the Mishnah. And then the Mishnah ends off vihi moyer shemayim aleichem. That has absolutely nothing to do with the first part of the Mishnah. But if you understand this, then it's good. The type of pras that you're allowed to do a mitzvah for is the pras that will get you more Yireh Shamayim. But regular pras, you're not allowed to do. And they also say that it's brought down, we had it earlier, that if you do a mitzvah that you don't have to do, then you actually get schar in olam hazeh as well. So here, Reb Zera was very exhausted. He could have just stayed and rested where he was. He didn't have an obligation to go and be mekayim the mitzvah of adarta pnei zaken. Since he did, so he wanted to do that. He wanted to go over and above and do something that he didn't have to do, so he can get extra schar by the mazeh. I guess that you are allowed to do. And the other mefarshim say that he felt not pshat, he was tired. He felt he was shvach. His mind wasn't clear enough in learning. So it must be the reason why I'm not learning good is because I felt in my ben adam l'chaverei. If I worked on my ben adam l'chaverei, then I'll help learn. Contrary to common opinion that they're not linked together, they're highly linked together. So he said, let me go do a serious ben adam l'chaverei exercise. I'll stand up for every Talmid Chacham that comes out, even all of those Talmid Chacham that I might have cursed out last week. Nevertheless, and through that, I'll have the schus that I'll be able to understand my learning better. And even though I'm exhausted, that's right. Novak, I should take back what Reb Zera didn't curse out any Talmid Chacham last week. just because I might have, doesn't mean he did. So Reb Zera was just exhausted. So shkoich for correcting me. Novak also Yenuka Devei Rav. So he's waiting for some massive Talmid Chacham to come out, and who comes out? A little kid comes out. Amalei, he told him, "My agamor charabuch, v'sat the Rebbe d'chos kalent. What did you learn today in Chayder?" Amalei, you know what we learned? We learned kashos, which are hops, boyer priadoma. The bracha is boyer priadoma, and chazes, this green grain. You make a bracha shehakol near b'dvarei. Amalei, so he told this little child, "Really? That's what your Rebbe told you?" Adrabah. Ibchem Shabbat. That Rebbe is a große Amudus. That Rebbe can go nicht. That Rebbe is an Amudus. The Weiss is a red. Adrabah. Ibchem Shabbat. Hi me'ara kamarbi. V'hai me'avira kamarbi. If anything, the hops should be a shehakol. If anything, the hops should be a shehakol because it grows in the air. And Rashi says it doesn't grow directly in the ground. It tends to act like a vine. It wraps around other trees, other bushes. Hops wraps around bushes and it's sort of growing in the air, while chazes actually grows from the ground. So if anything, it would be more appropriate to make a boyer priyadam on the chazes and a shehakol on the kashes. Zok Gemara, that was his taina, but at the end of the day, the hilchasa ki yenuka devei rav. The halacha is like yenuka devei rav, that on kashes should make a boyer priyadam and on chazes should make shehakol. My taina, why are we not listening to the svara of Reb Zera? Because hi gemar peri, the high love gemar peri. At the end of the day, the kashesh is a gemar peri, it's a completed peri, but the wheat is cut prematurely to get that green wheat, and it's not gemar peri. That's why you only make a shehakol near b'dvarei. That's right. I remember when we were taking faheres by Rabbi Forsheimer for smicha and Lakewood for Yeridea, one of his techniques in cutting you down to size was if during the faher a person would call in and ask a shaila related to what you were taking your faher on, so he would they didn't have hold buttons in those days. He would just put his hand over the receiver and he would go like this. This lady's calling. She wants to know her pot of mixed inflation. What's the locha? So you say, She has to kasher it. He says, okay, come on, it's okay. That's what he used to always do. So what I used to do, so that's why my smicha is probably fraudulent, because what I used to do is I used to get women, I would prepare a very complicated shaila, and I would ask women, and I would prepare the answer with a chlorkite, and then I would ask women to call in during my hair with the shaila. And then I gave Azah opinion, and he would manage the spoil for how I knew it chlor. I said, I hope he doesn't watch this. I don't think Rabbi Forsheimer watches YouTube, right? Otherwise, he'll formally, rescind our smicha. What? You have to understand, it wasn't Stama Shaila, because it's a 2-hour for hair. If it takes 3 seconds, I haven't benefited anything from it. It had to be a Shaila that will take me at least a half hour to answer, so that it also eats up part of the time of the hair. So it was all, perfectly engineered. But don't worry, I reciprocated. I called them by other people's fairs.
Yes, you will find out that those ladies who called in, he said they might too.
Very good. Okay. So I remember once on the fair, he asked me up Shaila and Shehakol Kedushin. So I said, we're here. We're your family. I'm like, what does Kedushin have to do with this? He says, you mean you haven't finished Nashon Zik and Klar, and you're coming to learn halacha? What's the matter with you? I think the main purpose of his fair was to show you that you don't know anything, and just calm down a little bit. Don't get too cocky. Anyway, Zok Tehillah Gemara Vayter. At the end of the day, we did paskin like what the Yenuka said, that on Kashais you make a boyer priadoma because it's a Gemar peri, and on Chazis you only make a Shehakol because it's not a Gemar peri. I Lamaisa Rabbi had a good time. My Dekamrit Haime Arak Karabi by my Vera Karabi. Loy, that's not a kasha either. You know why? Because kasha is not a Arak Karabi. Don't say that kashas just grow out of the air. Of course, they're nourished from the ground. They're not connected to the ground. They just wrap around the vine. But the hakachazina and the katlinla lizmasa, if you cut down the host, bush, which means now the bush will not get nourished anymore from the ground, the hops will die as well. So you see that the hops somehow were extracting nourishment out of the bush that it was wrapped around, and the bush was extracting nourishment from the ground. So you see that kashrus indirectly also gets nourished from the ground. In fact, now you're going back to another thing that Rav mentioned. Rav mentioned that these poor grade figs were not, you cannot use them for an Erev. In fact, you can't make an Erev with these types of figs. But Tanya, we learned, Kur's hearts of palm, Nikach bekesef meiser, you're allowed to buy hearts of palm with kesef meiser, so they're considered a Michael. The ein mitama to Masaychlin, but they're not mitama to Masaychlin. So you clearly see that just because they're something that you can eat, it doesn't mean that they're considered a Michael for the purposes of Tumasaychlin. Now, hearts of palm really are not a fruit. They're something that's going to harden and become into the tree. And it wasn't normal to plant a tree to get the hearts of palm. You planted a palm tree because you wanted a palm tree. Nowadays, things are done differently. But normally, it wasn't normal to plant a tree for the hearts of palm, but you could eat it. And therefore, it wouldn't be considered a Michael. It's not like a fruit of a peri, a fruit of a tree that has Tumas Eichel. So, but you could still buy it with Kesef Meiser because at the end of the day, it is something that is edible. Well, it's not only that. We learned yesterday all of the things that has to be peri, has to be Gdulei Oretz, and it does fit all those descriptions. It fits in to the most restrictive nature of how you would learn the Klal Prat Klal. It fits in. And therefore, you can buy it with Kesef Meiser, but it's still not a Michael Lagabe Tumas Eichel. The Chaf of the ice, which is what we're focused on, which Rav said you cannot use for an Erev, it's Nikchais Bekesef Meiser. You could buy it with Kesef Meiser, so then you for sure could make an Erev with it. Umatamis Tumas Eichel, it's Matamis Tumas Eichel. So right away, it's Shaver from this Brisa on Rav, who said that these things are not edible, and therefore you cannot use them for an Erev. And Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Kur Hareu Keitz L'Chol Davar, if it's like wood for all tzalachas, El Shanikach Bekesef Meiser, but you can buy it with Kesef Meiser. This probably sounds familiar because this is pretty much exactly what the Tanakama said. And the Gemara is going to ask, what is the difference between Rabbi Yehuda and the Tanakama? They both say you could buy it with Kesef Meiser, and they both say it's eight. It's not B'tam Tumas Eichel. But the Chafniyos, these types of figs, Harei and Capri L'Chol Devreim, they are a fruit for every purpose. El Shapturis V'Nais, El Shapturis V'Nameiser, the part of a Meiser. So the problem is, how could Rav say that you cannot make an Erev Chafniyos? It seems like both the Tanakama and Yehuda give it some value as a fruit. So to Gemara, Hasam b'dinischani. And now this is something that I never knew until now, until I learned in Rashi, and maybe I learned it before, but it was a big chiddush to me that there are the trees, palm trees, or these trees that grow these figs have gender to them. So the nischani is one of these figs that grew on a male gender tree. If it grew on a male gender tree, then this is the end of the line for it. It's not going to ripen and develop further. And that's what our Bracha is talking about, that you can use it for an Erev, because it is the final prairie. When Rav said that these chafnis, you can't make an Erev with them, it was those chafnis that are grown on a female gender tree, which will further develop into a normal fruit. And at this point, they're not yet a normal fruit, and that's why you cannot use them for an Erev. Please don't trust me on it. Let's read Rashi. This is what Rashi says. But in this chani, the kolim is a charim, male palm trees, Sha'oizim kafnis. Oh, and I apologize. I touched them as figs. They're dates. Sha'oizim kafnis that produce these types of dates. Ve'enim nasim timorim lo'olam. They'll never develop into fully developed and ripened dates. The chafnis hugamar peren, and this seemingly undeveloped fruit is the final stage of growth in the pears that grow on male gender tree. The loikin oisim benisin, and they usually pick these in nisin. The hanu uchlaninu, and they are uchla, and that's what the Bracha is referring to, that they're considered an oichel. But Rav, when Rav said that these kafnios you can't use for an Erev because they're not food, he's referring to the kolim nekevos. It's referring to female trees. Shechafni shalhem nasim tamarim. Hilchach akati lav gemar peri. It's not a gemar peri. I should have Googled this. Is there such a thing as a female gender tree and a male gender tree? And we know there is. Rashi says. Doesn't matter what Google says, but it would be interesting to get more information on that. If I remember today, I'll look it up. Okay. I hear. You're right. Fruits tend to identify themselves differently. Zok the hele gemor weiter.
Obviously identifies itself as a fruit.
What's that? Okay, I don't want to get thrown off of YouTube. Right, they have both. Right. Okay. Yeah, no. Most flowers are both, right? And that's where the bees come and they take the pollen on their legs and they. Okay. Zok the hele gemor weiter. If you buy your wife lilies, you see it the pile because they make a mess. Okay. Zok the gemor weiter. So we're talking about a different type. In fact, Gemara, if we're speaking about male pears, which means it's a gemar peri, what did Rabbi Yehuda say about these kafnios? Rabbi Yehuda said, "For kafnios, harayim kapri l'chol devrayim el shapturis min amaiser." Fact, Gemara, if it's a fully developed fruit, ihachi bahal lemer Rabbi Yehuda pturis min amaiser. If you're going to claim that the Bracha is referring to fully developed fruit, why is it that Rabbi Yehuda would say potem in meiser? They should be chayv in meiser. For Tanya, we learned a Bracha. Amar Rabbi Yehuda lehuskru page bisyuni elol inyan meiser b'vad. That we said page bisyuni are fruit. They are fruit that you do take meiser from them. And what is it that we said? Page bisyuni v'ahini detuvina. These two fruits chayavim b'meiser. You're chayv in meiser. So verkehrt, if you want to say that the Bracha is speaking by these types of male pears that are completed pears, well, then Rabbi Yehuda should hold chayv and meiser, as we showed you just now in the Bracha. He said you're chayv and meiser. So you have to say that the Bracha is not speaking by nischani, because if it was by nischani, Rabbi Yehuda would have to say chayv and meiser, and Rabbi Yehuda says that it's potter for the meiser. Rather, ula inyan tumas oichlin shiny. Tumas oichlin is different. And there we would give it a tuma. Could Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Hoyel v'royu l'maskon al yedei ar. Rabbi Yochanan said regarding a different issue that we're going to get into later, that since I could put it in fire and by heating it up it gets sweet, Hachanami hoil v'yochad l'maskan al yidei ar. So we're really ein maravin. Really, you cannot use these kofni ice for an erev because they're not good food. And in order to be able to use something for an erev, it's not enough to say that if you do something to it, then you'll be able to eat it. It has to be food now. It has to be ready to eat. Because if you're placing it to be koine shvisa, or if you're placing it to join you, it has to be food that's ready to be eaten. If it's food that's not ready to be eaten, it doesn't work for an erev. However, the Bracha that we quoted from Rav and Yehuda, it was a question of if you could buy it with kesef meiser, and it was a question of it's matama to that it doesn't have to be ready to eat. It doesn't have to be that you can eat it right away. If it's a peri, if it's a thing that requires some processing to it, it will still qualify as a food, because of meiser, and therefore the Bracha says that they qualify. But it's not a stira to Rav saying that you cannot use them for an erev, because the only things that you can use for an erev are things that are ready to be eaten. I mean, you can't use a raw egg for an erev. It has to be something that's ready to be eaten. It has to be, you can't use raw meat for your erev. It has to be something that's ready to be eaten. Zok to Gemara weiter. If you heat them up in the fire, it'll make them sweet. These dates, even though they're bitter now, but you could put them in the fire and it'll taste better. And related to what? Did Rabbi Yochanan tell us this klal that when you're able to process food further, it'll become more edible, that it's considered a food, like is a hodatanya. Shkedim hamorim, bitter. There were a certain type of species of almonds that they were called bitter almonds. Speaking of almonds, in the office of almond tree developments this Thursday night, I think there's a parliament meeting, or there's a shmooze coming there. Anyway, shkedim hamorim. If you have bitter almonds, ketanim, if they're small and before they're fully grown, when they're still small, they're not bitter yet. You can still eat them. So ketanim chayovin. The smaller ones, you'll be chayiv. But gedolim, once they're older, you're going to be potter. So I assume we're talking about a chiv meiser. We're talking about a chiv meiser. However, mesukim, if they're good almonds, the type of almonds that we eat, sweet almonds, gedolim chayavim, when they're fully grown, that's when they're chayiv meiser. But ketanim pturin, because they're not yet nigmar, the peri. Rabbi Shimon bar Yosy Omer, Mishum Aviv, Zeh v'zeh liftur. In other words, if you're talking about bitter, good grapes, good almonds we're not talking about. Bad almonds, the bitter almonds, it doesn't matter if they're still small and you can enjoy them, or if they're big and they're already bitter, regardless, they're not considered an oichlin. The army law, and there are those who quoted Shimon as saying, Zeh v'zeh l'chiyav. These almonds are both going to be chayiv. So the question is, how could you consider them both peris if they're bitter and you can't eat them? How could you say that there's a chiyav meiser on them? Omar Beloi said, "Hoyer Rab Chanina b'tzipurei, Rab Chanina paskin in tzipurei, kedivrei Omer zev liftor." That they're both potter, bitter almonds, no matter if they're fully grown or not, you're not chayiv to take meiser. L'man damer zev lechiyav l'may chazi. If you're going to say that bitter almonds, even when they're fully grown and they're bitter, you can't even eat them. So what purpose do they have? How could you say that they're an oichel, that they're chayiv in meiser? If you roast these almonds, even though they're bitter when they're raw, once you roast them, they're going to be good. So you see this concept that it's something's considered a meichel, whether it's for hilchos tumah, whether it's for hilchos meiser. If you can further process it and it'll taste good, that's considered a meichel. But for erev, it has to be ready to be eaten at this point, the way it is. Omar, Yehuda Omer, kur, hearts of thumb, hareu ke'etz l'chol dvar. It's like wood. In other words, it doesn't have a din of a meichel. El shanikach b'kesef meiser. It can be purchased with kesef meiser. In fact, more hani Tanakama. That's what the Tanakama said. So let's go back and see their exact wording, because that's going to be needed to understand the teretz anyway. So it says Vatanya. Going back to the top of the Omid. Kor nikach b'kesef meiser. You can buy a car with kesef meiser. The ain metama tumas oichlin, but it's not metama tumas oichlin. What did Rabbi Yehuda say? Rabbi Yehuda said, "Kor hareu ke'etz l'chol devarav." It's like eitz. El shenikach b'kesef meiser. So Rabbi Yehuda also agrees that you can buy kor b'kesef meiser, and it's eitz l'chol devar. It's not matama tumas oichlin. So what is the difference between Rav Yehuda's comments and the Tanakama? Omer Abaye, Sholku v'tagnu ikabenayu. If you took this kur and you cooked it and you fried it, where it becomes good food, that's when it'd be an afkamina. So the Tanakama holds. The Tanakama doesn't say hareu ke'etz l'chol devarav. The Tanakama just says. Ein mitama tumas. However, that's only the way it is. But if you fried it and cooked it, then it would be mitama tumas. Rabbi Yehuda says hareu ke'etz. You could take a piece of wood and you can cook it as much as you want. It doesn't make it edible. Rabbi Yehuda, no matter what you did with it, it would not be bought because of meiser. Zok tehila gemor vayter. For Tanya, we learned, and how could you say that Rabbi Yehuda says that no matter how much you cook or fry something, it still doesn't become edible? I'm going to show you things that have no shaykhs to being food, but once you cook them, we consider them food. Or hide of an animal, vashilya, and the placenta, ein mitamin tumas oichlin. They're not going to be mitamin tumas oichlin because, and we're focusing on hide. Hide is not food. However, or sholku. But if you cooked or very much and you softened it up, the shilya shechishav Allah or shilya that you intended to eat, mitamin tumas oichlin. So how could you say that Rabbi Yehuda holds that no matter what you did to it, it wouldn't make them to an oichel? This is kur. This is harsher problem. It's something somewhat edible. If even hide, if you cook it enough, it becomes edible. So why would Rabbi Yehuda argue by hartapam? Alamarava ikebenayu bracha. The machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and the Tanakama is not whether or not if you fried it or if you cooked it, it will be considered a meichel. They both hold it's a meichel. So again, what's the machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda, who said areu che'etz l'chol dvar, and the Tanakama, who just said that you can buy with a meiser, just not matama tumas oichlin. What is the chiluk between these two shitas? So tomorrow the nafkamina merely is the bracha that you would make on it. The itmar we learned the machlokes. Kar Rav Yehuda Omer. Now this is not to be confused with Rebbe Yehuda the Tana. We're looking for the difference between Rebbe Yehuda the Tana, who said kar is like eitz, and the Tanakama. We're quoting now a Rav Yehuda who's an Amoira. Kar, hard to problem. Rav Yehuda the Amoira says, Omar boire pri hadama. You make a boire pri hadama on kar. Ushmul Omer Shehakol ni b'dvarai. You say a Shehakol, you make a Shehakol on it. Rav Yehuda Omar boire pri hadama because uchlahu. It's food. Since eventually hartapam hardens and becomes part of the trunk of the tree, so let's take a step back. So in our brush, we'll have Rabbi Yehuda, the Tana, who said that kar is ke'etz l'chol devarov. He'll hold like Shmuel, who says that you make a shehakol on it because soifel hakshos. But the Tanakama, who didn't say that, they just said that you could buy meiser, or you could buy with meiser. I want to make sure I'm not confusing it. The Tanakama, who said that you could buy because of meiser, which is not matama tumas oichlin, they would hold that you make a boyer pri hadama on hartapam. Halacha l'maisa, what does the oil make on hartapam? We eat hartapam. I assume we probably make a boyer pri hadama because we plant trees especially for that. I assume. They probably harvest trees for that. I don't know. Okay, Zok tehila gemor vayter. Amalei Shmuel or Rabbi Yehuda. Shidina, even though I disagreed with you and I said you make a shehakol and hartapam, kavosach mistaver. I think you're right. That's called intellectual honesty. Tatznoin, radish, which we know is going to eventually become hard. So my tanya that since something's going to harden, it degrades the bracha and bar predama to shehakol is not valid. But v'loi, Shmuel's concession to Rabbi Yehuda is not a good concession because Tanoin not to inchi adai to the pugla. People actually plant radish for the specific purpose of getting that radish. So even though it's going to harden, but since people plant it for that purpose, that gives it a bayu priyadama. But dikla, a palm tree, learn not to inchi adai to the kaira. No one plants a palm tree because he wants to get the hearts of palm. To the contrary, he wants to grow a tree. Zaktim of avagad the kolsei. Shmuel or Rabbi Yehuda, and even though Shmuel, today we pass on like Shmuel, that on the hearts of palm you make a shehakol. Okay, so there you got it. You make a shehakol. Zaktim more better. So you're right. So we'd have to ask a shayla. I don't know. I eat hartzpam all the time. I don't know what bracha I make. So we have to find out what bracha you make. Chizak to Gemara weiter. Gufa. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav. Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Rav. Kashois, which are hops, the chazes and green tvua. My Rav and behen, you could use it for an erev. Umavarchad alei and boyer priyadama. So now the question is, the Gemara is getting into a new shayla. How much food is considered enough for a meal? Kashois bekama. So the Gemara could Amar Rabbi Yechiel kamalei hayad. A handful of it is considered enough for 2 meals. The article speaks out that it doesn't necessarily mean that there's enough food to fill an entire meal. It means that you took a serving size of this product, but it could be in a meal, there would be other things that you eat along with it. But a proper serving size would be kamal hayad. Hachaname kamal hayad, over here as well, we'll say malay hayad. So there the shaila was that it should be base sudas for an erev. So here also it's kamal hayad. Chazes bekama, Amar Rabba bar Tovia bar Yitzchak Amar Rav, kamal uzilisa the size bundle that they would typically make, that would be the serving size. Amar Chalakia bar Tovia, Ma'arvin Bekalya. It's a hard stem of a plant. You can't eat it. In fact, Bekalya is like you can't eat that. It's hard. V'chama, how much of it do you need to make an erev? Amar B'chiel Kamal Hayad. Again, went out to the villages to look at. He had a lot of land, and he was going to see how his land was producing, how the crop was growing. So when he went out there into the field, boy minei, right away they came to ask him shilas. Mahu la'ariv v'pul lachen. So at the end of the day, it doesn't make a difference where he is. A rabbi always is going to get approached by people to ask shilas. That's why Rabbi Felder told me my hours are from 9 to 9, from 9 a.m. to 9 a.m. Because wherever he goes, people ask him shilas, right? So boy minei mal la'ariv v'pul lachen. Are you allowed to make an erev with soft? So he was out in the field and he didn't have the answer. So Kiyasal made midrasha when he went back to his office. Amrulay, the oilam and shul. Rabbi Yanai said, "My Rav and the pul nachan, you could use it for an erev. The kama and how many pul nachan got? Amar Bamnuna, my Rav betrayed in chayin. You could make an erev with raw beets. Any is that so? A live person, meaning it's very toxic. Zakta Gemara, when do we say that it's toxic? It's beboshel v'loy boshel. If it's partially cooked but not fully cooked, those beets can kill you. We're talking about completely raw carrot. Amar Bamnuna, ein my Rav betrayed in chayin. You may not use raw beets as an erev. Amar B'chista silka chaya. The reason why you can't use it for an erev because it's toxic. We see everyone cooked, then it's no longer dangerous. So it's exactly the opposite conclusion of what we had before. Of beets, yafa lelev. I'm flying here. I didn't prepare this, so let's see how it goes. It's good for your heart, and it's also good for your eyes. If it's good for your heart and it's good for your eyes, it's got to be good for your bnei. But I didn't know what the Chacham was there either. Could you imagine? Does he say anything? I cannot see. That's right. I'm on the old one. When do you say it's good? That's only if it's on the kira. If it's on the kira, meaning shemavushal, and it's starting to dissolve. That's when it's good for you. That's the sound it makes when it's bubbling on the stove. I remember this Gemara now. I'm like Ben Azai in the markets of Tveria. Zok Rashi, what does that mean? He was having a light Talmidov, and he told us Talmidim, Hashta tzili daitoi. I'm very clear today. I'm feeling like if someone comes in today and says, I'm feeling on the high, I feel like I can conquer the world, you tell him to get a drug test, right? But Rava was high on Torah. I'm so clear now, I'm prepared to have an open question like Rabbi Victor Miller used to have. You can ask me on anything you want, just like Ben Azai, he was known to be super smart. So you Dorish B'Shukei Tveria, he would die. There was no greater lamdan than him, so he would be able to handle any question posed to him. Everybody, every time a chacham to me, I can take him on easily. There are no except for this baldi. I'm not sure which baldi he was referring to. But Ben Azai. So Ben Azai was referring to Rabbi Kiva. I could take on anyone except for Rabbi Kiva the Baldi. So Rava basically asked to be challenged. So Amalei Humei Rabbanan, the Rava tapuchim bekam. To make an Erev. Omer lei v'chima Ravin b'tapuchin. Can you make an Erev with apples? So why not? But nan kol oichlin mitztarfin livsoil asagvia b'chatzi pras uvemozoin shtei sudos le'erev. So let's see what this means. Livsoil asagvia zakrashim ochal oichlin. If you ate food tamein afal gav shein oichl matama adam b'maga. When you eat, if you touched oichl, that's a rishon, you cannot become a sheni. A human cannot become a sheni. But if you ate a rishon, you ochel menayu of food that's tamei, and what shear is that? The hainu shnei beitzim. You had the shear of two beitzim. You ate the shear of two beitzim of meichel that's tamei. Nifsal milechal b'truma. Even though technically you don't become tamei, but it's usher for you to eat truma. So chetze hainu pras lashon prusa, it's a broken piece. V'chatzi chetze hainu chatzi pras. So a half of a if one eats it, that person may no longer eat truma. Uva mazon shtei sudos, the erev, which is our subject, or it's also mitzaref ukabetza the tamata masoichlin, or to be a kabetza because the betza, meaning if I had a piece of food that was a rishon l'tov and there was less than a betza of it, if another food touches it, it will not make that food into a sheni. It only will make a food into a sheni if it itself has a shir kabetza. So you see clearly that you have a high mighty yufta. Why is that a problem on Rava? Why is that a kasha to Rava, who was questioning whether or not you can use an apple for an erev? If the challenge on Rava is because the Bracha is kol oichlin, and apples are edible, Mechi, thank you very much. Is a keepers to. No, they don't mean me. They didn't mean me. I'm different. Everybody has to wear a mask, but I'm different because I have this. I have that. No rule ever applies to Jews because of the halach in the Gemara. It's not a new thing. I'm sorry? I got the quarantine. I'm different. The tahim, the hair, right? Ain't made them in a klolo. So I feel it b'makom shnebar b'chutz. You're not on the list. I'm still different. So you can't be a rifle. that apples are going to be edible. Our apples are going to be royu to oh, you can't bring me a raya from there that apples are good for an Erev. V'mazon shtei sudois le'eruv u'chaveta l'tamit ha'mesoichlin. Since the Bracha is not only talking about Erev, the Bracha is talking about other halachas as well. So from the context, from looking what is relevant to the other halachas in the Mishnah, we can see and extract what the Mishnah is talking about. So since it says, and apples, surely apples could be tamei tumas. So that's my raya that you could also use apples for an Erev. So the kama, lemaisa, how many apples? How many apples do you have to have? You have to have a kav. I guess we should stop over here because it's
Shkoyach.